Tonight we are in Greenock on the banks of the Clyde, once famous for shipbuilding and industry. In recent years it's faced tough times but is now the focus for regeneration. So what will the audience here want to talk about tonight? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Good evening. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to ask the questions, answering them on our panel this evening. Dr. Poonam Gupta is a leading UK entrepreneur. Arriving in Greenock 20 years ago, Poonam started her company at the kitchen table. It's now one of the country's most successful export businesses, operating in 60 countries with a turnover of around £60 million. Scottish businessman Lord Malcolm Offord is the UK Government Minister for Scotland. Born and educated in Greenock, he followed this with a 25-year career in the City of London before founding his private equity firm, which invests in small to medium-sized Scottish businesses. Last year, he became a member of the Inverclyde Task Force, which aims to revitalise the local economy and create new jobs. Christopher Brookmyre is a genius. Not my words, but the opinion of fellow crime writer Richard Osman. Christopher was a journalist and newspaper sub-editor before going on to become one of Britain's leading crime novelists, selling over 2 million books. Paul Sweeney is the Scottish Labour MSP for Glasgow and the party spokesperson for mental health, health equalities and sport. Paul was an MP until 2019 and had a previous career with Scottish Enterprise and BAE Systems. He spent this week trying to find investors to save the Morton's Roll factory in Glasgow. And finally, from the SNP, Jenny Minto is the MSP for Argyll and Bute and was elected in 2021 to replace Mike Russell. Jenny's a qualified chartered accountant and spent almost 20 years as a business executive at the BBC before entering politics. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience here in Greenock. It's great to be back with you. And you can join in the discussion from home at BBC Debate Night if you want to follow us on social media. To debate along with us, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. And our Debate Night podcast will be available immediately after the programme on BBC Sounds. So let's get started. Lots to get through. Our first question tonight comes from Eileen O'Donoghue. Eileen.
Good evening, panel. Which of the three candidates in the SNP leadership race would make the best First Minister of Scotland?
Ooh, thank you. First TV debate last night, of course. Our own debate next Tuesday, 8 o'clock, live on BBC Scotland. Christopher Brookmyre, which of the three would make the best First Minister of Scotland?
I think at this point I'd be looking for some kind of Frankenstein's monster where you could probably take elements of a couple of the candidates. You know, I'm impressed by Kate Forbes' level of competence and kind of command of her brief, but there's obviously certain elements of her policies and ideology that I would be less comfortable with. I think it's kind of unfortunate that one of the things that's given the nature of the SNP and its defining objective is that it's a debate that's going to be very much revolving around three different visions of how to achieve something that Westminster can then say no to. You know, all the different visions of how can they effect some kind of referendum. And I think as long as Westminster refuses to answer the question of how Scotland can, or by what mechanism Scotland can democratically leave the Union, then there's no point in the three candidates all offering versions of how they imagine that might come about. So,
what's your priority? What should be at top of the entry?
For the
new First Minister?
New First Minister. Health has been the top of everybody's priority list for quite some time. We've seen a lot of discussion this week. The BBC have done it as a report on people feeling they've got to go abroad and look into the private sector. So that would be, again, there's not really any winning in health. There's only degrees of losing. So it's kind of a bit of an impossible task, as I also feel like when it comes to health on a national level or on a Scottish level, that we shouldn't be talking about reorganisation or what policy might make a difference to waiting lists when it's kind of a holistic approach that's required there. It's an approach that's going to require people looking at not just social care but housing, poverty, wages, the whole picture.
Across society.
I think the other thing is that health, the NHS isn't the problem. The NHS is the point at which the problems created in other parts of society literally present themselves.
Hold that thought. Let's go back to Eileen, who asked the question. Who are you impressed with so far?
For me, it would be politically and personally, it would be Kate Forbes. I think she was the most candidate of the three on the hustings.
Anybody else in the audience? Got a favourite at the moment? The back row.
Yeah, I'm Kate Forbes as well, I have to say. I think watching the debate yesterday, Hamza Yousaf seemed particularly keen to promote his cause, a little bit too much for me, and I think he's on the wrong agenda.
Right, well, you're talking to Jenny Minto down here, a Hamza Yousaf supporter. You've given your backing to him. What would you say to that gentleman?
So thank you for that comment. The reason I support Hamza is because I'm looking for a leader that is passionate, can tell a good story, can paint a positive picture about Scotland, and most importantly, recognises their own strengths and also the strengths of others, and then can pull together a really strong team that will solve the various issues that we have in Scotland, but also lead us towards the independence that I truly believe Scotland should have.
Were you surprised to see the three candidates scrapping the way they did last night and rubbishing some aspects of what had gone on before?
So, personally, I was uncomfortable with that. However, I do think it also shows the passion of the people that are involved, the beliefs. It gives us an idea of how they want to move Scotland forward as an independent country. And I think also gives everybody an opportunity to see how strong they are in their beliefs. And I think as well, although, as I said, personally, I found it quite a difficult watch, I'm impressed that the party is being as open as it is. Not only have we got the television debates, but also every single hustings that is happening within the party itself for party membership are also being broadcast on social media. And I think that's really important, and I think it shows the openness and the belief that the SNP have in the people of Scotland. OK,
let's jump into the audience. Man in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, exactly what you were saying. I did watch it as well, and all they done was slated each other. And they came across as if they were saying about all their flaws, all their faults. Well, that's what they're doing to the country. All those flaws, all those faults that they were slagging each other about, that's exactly what they've done. And all they kept talking about and referring back to it, and you've just done it as well, independence. No, let's concentrate on our NHS. Let's concentrate on our education. Let's concentrate on getting reduce poverty, rather than constantly talking about independence at the moment.
Right. More hands up in the audience. Man down on the floor here. Yeah.
Jenny, why the hustings are being conducted in private? You just said there that the candidates are looking to be open and let everybody see what they're all about. So I don't understand why the public and the media are banned from attending.
So I've just come here in a taxi from Edinburgh, directly from the Parliament, and I was sitting there with a mobile phone watching on social media the hustings that are happening just down the road in Johnson just now. So they're there for people to access, to watch, to make their minds up on the three candidates that are standing to be first and foremost leader of the Scottish National Party, and then also, I would hope, be voted in as First Minister of our country.
Yeah, and there is media access as well, has been agreed. Man,
support a man that's been a disaster in every department he's been in. Yeah, he hasn't had a very good record in any of them.
That was the point.
Just as the gentleman said there as well about independence, you need to sort out your own economy just now before you can get independence. Look at the shambles even down the road at Port Glasgow with the ferries, SNP.
All right, we might go on to that later, but let Jenny just answer that point, because that was the point that Kate Forbes was making strongly last night.
It was the point that was, but I think Hamza Yousaf came back very strongly on that as well. With transport, the Queen's Ferry crossing, that came in on budget, on time. The health service, we had the fastest rollout of the booster COVID jab. And also with justice, he's done a lot for women's rights, supporting that. And I think the stories that you see are from the press, from people asking specific questions. But Parliament and running a country is a lot more than the headlines that you see on the news programmes. And I think there's a lot goes on.
Well, hang on a second. It was Kate Forbes who was asking the question about his record. It wasn't the media. It wasn't the media that was asking the question last night.
I think that's fair. But may I also say that I think it's important to recognise that Scotland, out of the 4 nations in the United Kingdom, is the only one where we haven't had strikes in the health service. And I think that's something very, very important.
OK, Malcolm Offord, you will have to deal with whoever ends up in the job as First Minister. Who would you rather be negotiating with of the 3?
Well, if I was a nationalist, which I'm not, I would be in utter despair at the state of the Scottish National Party right now. Been in government for 15 years, and they've not moved the project any closer. Now, the first 7 years were under Alex Salmond. Whether you like him or not, he actually ran a competent government. And he understood one thing, which is that Scotland has to go on its own, it has to be prosperous, it has to build prosperity.
Yeah, that's ancient history. We've got a choice of 3,
hold on,
Malcolm.
he moved it from 30 to 45. And it would have been reasonable to say to Nicola Sturgeon, can you move from 45 to 60? And she hasn't done that. And the reason is because they've been so focused on this independence obsession, they haven't run the country. They've been incompetent in government.
So here's a fresh start.
In every area of our
Here's a fresh start. So
life.
which of the 3 do you think is best placed for the job?
They call him the continuity candidate. I'd call him the calamity candidate. Because every department he's run has been a bit of a disaster.
No, it's not, according to Jenny.
If you take Ash Regan, she's new to politics, but she's sort of Alice in Wonderland. She doesn't really understand economics. She wants to ditch sterling, which is the whole reason we can get through this crisis. Launch a new currency, which will be economic misery for everyone. Let's call it the Scottish Drachma. And then you've got Kate Forbes, and she's the most talented of them all, and she's the one that understands business, and she would actually drive a pro-business agenda. And what has she said? She said that we have to earn the right for independence by creating prosperity in Scotland.
So she's your choice?
That could be 10, 15 years away. Now, we could work with Kate Forbes. She's a sensible, talented politician. She's very young, 32 years old. She's a young baby. I'm surprised, actually, she's coming in to do it at this time because the coffers are bare and the project is failing. But I admire her standing up to do it. I won't endorse any of the candidates. I'm just making an observation.
So
if I was a nationalist, I'd be very
You
disturbed.
just said you could work with Kate Forbes. Does that suggest you could not work with the other 2?
I think because when she was in finance secretary, we were able to at least we had the UK government and Scottish government were able to work quite effectively with Kate Forbes. So I would imagine that she comes across to me as a more business-minded
But you would worry
person.
about how you would work with the other 2?
Yes.
Back to the audience. Gentleman in the back row.
It's a bit rich coming for a Tory unelected minister to actually talk about the SNP and the disaster it is.
Yeah.
Can you see what's happened to the disaster in Westminster?
Yeah. Can I come on that? On the unelected thing, so I'm in the Westminster Parliament. There are 2 parliaments. House of Commons makes laws. House of Lords does not make law. All the House of Lords does is scrutinise and challenge law and prevent bad law being made. We've got a whole series of Scottish laws being made in Holyrood right now that need to be challenged and scrutinised, and they could do with a second chamber in Scotland.
OK, I don't want to get diverted into the House of Lords. Lady in the front row here.
Can I just say I am very upset as a fellow Greenock, even though I'm in a different party from yourself, that you have practically thrashed the Scottish Government for the last 15 years. And can I just say, since 2008, if I'm right, it's either 2008, 2009, we have had a Tory government in Westminster who couldn't give a damn about Scotland, and we have been voted. They voted against anything. They have never gave us any credit. And you're talking about the Scottish Government being bad. Westminster has been absolutely abominable.
Malcolm Offord.
So, Scotland is a vital part of the United Kingdom, and Scotland is very well funded by being part of the United Kingdom. It costs basically 100 billion to run Scotland, and we raise 75 in tax. So we get 25. It's like you're spending £1,000 a week and you're earning £750. We get that from the UK Treasury, and the UK government in Westminster has funded the Scottish government with a record amount of funding. So there's absolutely no evidence to say that the Westminster government does not care about Scotland, quite the contrary. And when we've now come with the whole Brexit agenda and we have the whole redistribution of funds, Scotland is doing very well in terms of levelling up agenda, in terms of the city deals, and is a very vital part of the United Kingdom.
We'll get on to levelling up in just a moment, hopefully. Paul Sweeney, which of the three candidates, maybe based especially on last night, would make the best First Minister in your view?
Well, I sat and watched the debate last night, and I suppose it's easy, you know, you would assume that I would be enjoying the schadenfreude of them tearing into each other, but actually, first and foremost, I'm watching this as a Scot who's desperate for competent government, because I want our country to succeed. I think we all share that common aim. So I was watching it with increasing, you know, dispiriting feelings, you know, that actually here we are faced with, you know, whatever you might think of Nicola Sturgeon, and I certainly don't agree with most of what she wants to achieve in politics, but you could certainly say that she was someone who was a political giant in a British context and a European context. I'm looking at these contenders to succeed her and thinking this is such a gulf in talent, such a drop-off in talent in the SNP.
It's going to be one of them, so which one?
And I don't really look at any of them with any degree of hope. I think I was looking at someone who could have been a Tory candidate, I was looking at someone who could have been an SNP continuity candidate or mediocrity candidate, and I'm looking at someone who could have been representing the Alba party. You know, so I think the only thing that really unites these people is a goal of independence, but within that we're going to see big fissures appear in the Scottish National Party because it's an ideological project. It's not really united by any common economic or social purpose beyond, you know, changing the flag above Edinburgh Castle. And I think we're going to increasingly see that come to the fore because Nicola Sturgeon, because she was so dominant, because she was such a presidential figure, that release will create a vacuum that will really bring a lot of pressure into the SNP. And when I'm looking at the state of Scottish public services, certainly my role in the health brief, 1 in 7 Scots on an NHS waiting list, people who are coming with devastating stories about dying waiting on ambulances. They're having treatment for cancer, realising that if they'd only got there with a diagnosis a few weeks earlier, they would have been treated. Now they are actually facing a terminal illness. These are absolutely horrendous situations, and we've seen a 27% increase in these waiting lists under Humza Yousaf's tenure. You know, so this is something that we could have been focused on solving as a country with a bit of humility, with a bit of collective purpose to get round this together and solve it, because we all have skin in the game, we all have relatives who are touched by this. With 1 in 7 Scots are on these waiting lists, we need to focus on that as a country. I didn't feel much humility coming through last night.
Poonam, I'll come to you in just a second, but let me just hear from the audience. Man on the front row here.
Can I just say, why does none of the 4 people on here answer a question? There's so much background chatter, irrelevant. Nobody asked you about your position in mental health. Nobody asked you about London. They just asked you a simple, straightforward question. That's the problem with politics. There's too much gas and not enough work, in my opinion.
I do my best every week.
No disrespect to you, Stephen.
We'll have another go in just a second.
There's not one person on there answered the straightforward question.
This gentleman in the front here.
I think the one who's come out the most honest is probably Kate Forbes, with what she's saying with her religious beliefs. Do I agree with what she says, her beliefs? No. But at least she came out, unlike the politicians here, and said it. I think she's got, you see, that dominance that Nicola Sturgeon had. I think she's got that attribute. And as the Lord said there, she seemed quite a clever person, financially and all that. When she first finance minister, it was this is your job, and she got on with it, and she seemed to do quite well. So I think she's probably the best to see at the moment out of the 3 of them.
OK, Poonam, looking at that gentleman with the beard right in the eye, which of the 3 candidates would make the best First Minister for Scotland?
Well, I'm not a politician, first of all. So what I'd like to say, I've got to know both Kate and Humza on several occasions. I saw the debate last night. One thing that came out very clearly is all 3 of them acknowledge that things need to change. They acknowledge that however things are happening, that's not the way to go forward. From my point of view, Humza or Kate, both, whoever takes the leadership, I want to see what is their plan for Scotland, what is their plan for the economy, fixing the economy, what is their plan for fixing our health. We in Scotland have some of the finest universities in the world. What is the plan for fixing our education system? And a gentleman mentioned referendum, and I agree with you. I believe that there is time for everything. There would be perhaps a time in the future where Scotland is ready for another referendum, and whether we choose it or not depends upon the vote of the public here. But right now, there are critical issues which need addressed, and whoever comes in the leadership role, I want them to tackle those issues head on and stop playing this blame game between Westminster and the Scottish Government.
You got a straight answer.
She never said either. She said one of two. She didn't absolutely say which one it was.
Well, we don't care.
Can you clarify which person you would go for?
If I say
one question, one answer.
Is there a guarantee that that's going to be the next leader? I have two that I think are potentially
Who do you think would be the best leader?
I want to see them what they are going to do, and they're not just going to go on and do the same thing which has been happening, which they are acknowledging
There
themselves.
is a bit to go in this contest as well, and the voting is not even open yet. And part of what might help decide it is next Tuesday with us, a debate night leadership special. All three candidates competing to be SNP leader, First Minister as well. Ash Regan, Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes will be with us in Edinburgh. It will be live next Tuesday evening at 8 on BBC One Scotland. Earlier time, 8 p.m. If you'd like to be part of the audience, go to the address that's on your screen right now and apply. Let's go to our second question of the night here in Greenock, and it comes from Roddy McCaskill. Roddy, where are you? Evening.
Evening. How would the panel restore pride and faith in Clyde shipbuilding following the farcical mismanagement of the two new ferries at Ferguson's in Port Glasgow?
Thank you, Roddy. We are tonight in Greenock, just along the road from where those two ferries sit, well over budget and late as well. Paul Sweeney, you worked in shipbuilding. How do we restore the pride and the faith in Clyde shipbuilding? Is it possible?
Yes, it is possible, and it's one of the main reasons I got involved in politics, because I was frustrated at seeing an industry that people had written off. You know, the reasons behind the calamity at Ferguson's are actually quite straightforward. They ran ahead with a project that hadn't had a fully completed design and tried to build a ship that didn't have a full design. That was a cruel deceit on a very skilled and capable workforce. We've seen that the very same workers can build state-of-the-art, world-class warships and naval ships up at Govan, Scotstoun and over in Rosyth. It's the same people. There's Pride of the Clyde coaches go up from Greenock every day to those yards. So let's not kill ourselves over the idea that we can't do it anymore. We can. We're very capable. But we're failed by a very self-defeating vanity project that was commissioned by the Scottish Government. They should have patiently realised this was a yard that was down on its ebb. It had nothing going for it at that point because it just basically collapsed. Let's build this up again patiently. Let's get this ferry project as a test bed for getting back into commercial shipbuilding. And instead, they thrashed it to the point of destruction. That was a tragedy, and now we're paying the price for that, literally, with the most expensive ferry of its kind in the world. So really what we need to do is understand that that was a mistake and a strategic failure, but we shouldn't write off the future of shipbuilding. It's a disgrace that we're spending hundreds of millions of pounds building ferries that could be built on the Clyde in Turkey, and the Scottish Government are spending that money overseas when we know that for every pound spent on shipbuilding in Scotland, it generates another 35% for the Scottish economy. If we're talking about growing our economy, growing our tax base, and being able to invest in public services, it's the economics of the madhouse, quite frankly, to be sending that public money overseas, and we're getting, nothing for it as a result.
Roddy, what do you think?
So exactly that. I think the government and Caledonian McBrain have tightened the noose, or killed it off entirely by passing future work out to abroad. They should be having another go at letting Ferguson's try again, or other Scottish, British shipbuilders.
Man in the back row. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been watching this for 5 or 6 years, and there's been real challenges that people perhaps don't appreciate. Obviously, we have the COVID situation. They were trying to rebuild the yard whilst building these state-of-the-art ships. They have built these ships before. They are capable, as you rightly point out. We do have the labour to do it, but there's been specific things. Now, I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all, but the Glen Sannox was towed back upriver yesterday to the shipyard, having been in dry dock for 2 weeks. She doesn't look any closer to being ready. And they're saying May, June entry into service. I just can't see it happening. There must be a fundamental problem here. There must be a lack of resource going into this yard in terms of people and materials. They haven't got the parts yet for the LNG to make a run on LNG.
Gentleman on the same row as you, there. Yeah.
I'm very sorry for the shipyard workers. Everybody looks at them and believe that they can't do the job that they're actually capable of doing. And it's all because of what Paul pointed out there. The planning initially and the design wasn't ready, it wasn't fit for purpose, but it seems to be falling on the shoulders of the workforce, which instead of the politicians and actually the designers, which is CMAL, who made a complete ash of the whole thing.
Do we have people in the audience who work in shipbuilding tonight, or whose families work in the shipbuilding industry? On the front row here.
All of my family worked in shipbuilding, so they did. And we personally, because my father was a great unionist and a Red Clydesider, we knew Sir Ross Belsh, and they need at Port Glasgow a top man that knows shipbuilding. And I think, as the man said behind us, they didn't have the marine draftsmen that they needed to put down in paper the plan.
And how do you feel about this whole situation? Those boats still sitting there?
Well, I originally, born in Greenock, was raised in Port Glasgow. I feel sorry because as a child, I went to many a launch of a ship in Port Glasgow and down in Ferguson's, and I actually remember the Queen and everything coming to launch ships. And it's one of the most heartbreaking things that we have lost everything. Every shipbuilding yard in the Lower Clyde, apart from Ferguson's. And I'll start to get quite emotional now. We need to fight to keep that as our heritage. So we do, for the future. And I know that they are bringing in, every year, they bring in apprentices so that skills aren't lost.
It hurts you to see this.
Yes, it does.
Poonam, you know about this, Poonam, as well. I mean, your office is next door to where we are tonight. You'll drive past these ships every single day. What would you say to that lady?
When I do drive past every single day, when I first moved here, I heard and read about all this glorious history of this area in shipbuilding and how people took pride. In fact, at that time, I met a lot of people who had worked in shipbuilding. Can the pride be restored? Can an industry be restored? I believe that I'm a businesswoman. Budgeting is a critical part. I think there should be a thorough review, and Paul's touched on that, of what has gone wrong, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be done. It can be done if it is done with the right intention, with proper experts in place. And if there are experts around here, there are apprentices who are coming. And by all means, get talent from across the globe if you need to bring them back here, incentivize business and get this industry going again. Why build ships in Turkey? This area has done it, just about 30, 35 years ago? Can that all come back? Can that industry come back? I believe that it can. But somebody needs to take responsibility of how and what they are going to do to restore that pride back in shipbuilding.
Is that not just globalisation in action, though? I mean, you run a global business. Is what we're seeing with shipbuilding not just the end result of globalisation?
Not necessarily, I will say. There are countries who have started and have learned from technologies from other countries and made industry out of it. I'm a businesswoman. I sit across multiple boards. I speak to a lot of business. There's so much work happening in Scotland in innovation, in technology. And I believe that, the expertise is here. And these are not cheap ships which are being built. These are ships which require technology, engineering. Can that be done? Yes, it can be done. But it needs to be done by bringing in experts, reviewing what is being done, considering these two boats were being built here. But who can imagine? I mean, I'm surprised and shocked both to hear this, that somebody would start building a boat without even having a final draft. Would you start building a house without your architect giving you final details? Or would I allow my architect to say, I'm going to build you a house for 100,000, then present me a bill for $500,000? What am I going to say to them? Why do these, it happens quite often, these public funded projects overrun? Then the public has the right to also ask, are we being shortchanged here? Why is it that the corporate and the government is not able to work together to deliver what they promised? Why is it that it's just okay to say, oh, by the way, this happened? There's a history of this company building ships. Why did it happen in the first place? And what do we do for preventing it from happening again.
Malcolm Offord, you will remember when you were growing up here, shipbuilding in a completely different way than it is now. Can these days ever return to this place, do you think? Can we restore the pride and
My
faith?
earliest memory was in Esplanade. I was 3 years old, 1967, the QE2 came down. I remember the whole town came down, well, 4 or 5 deep. It was an incredible moment, and that's our proud heritage. Now, if we look to the 21st century, some of the big industries that we're going to be very successful in, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's advanced manufacturing, we've got a need for small craft, whether it's in the North Sea, whether it's going out to do the wind farms, whether it's the salmon farms that we have on the West Coast, whether it's the ferries. We have a real demand. We are an island nation to have specialist shipbuilding and specialist craft, and it should be here in Port Glasgow. Now, we have also some very specialist shipbuilding in Glasgow and in Rosyth, in Govan at British Aerospace and Babcock in Rosyth. In the 5 years these two ferries have been lying there, the MOD have built 7 ships, 2 aircraft carriers and 45 destroyers. So we can do it. We can do it. And when I was at Babcock, and the Koreans came to see Babcock and they said, we don't have anything like the technology, we don't have anything like the skills that you have here in Scotland. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't do it.
So what needs to change?
But I'm afraid, to my fellow Greenockian here, I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, this project has been run by the Scottish Government. They took it over. It's been interfered with by politicians. The UK Government is running the MOD yards without that level of interference, has put good management in there and built a pipeline. And so I would just suggest that it can be done. It's not been done, and it can be done. Let's build a pipeline and get Ferguson's moving.
Paul Sweeney?
What we need is a long-term plan. CalMac's actually got one of the biggest fleets in Europe. It's got 40 vessels almost. So if we actually have a guaranteed renewal, it would need 1 new ship every 9 months. So it's a guaranteed pipeline of orders. If you can actually give that long-term security to a company and say, if you put £500 million into building a proper fit-for-purpose shipyard, all under cover, say like at Inchgreen Dry Dock, which is sitting there, one of the biggest docks in Europe, put a roof over it, put heavy cranes inside it, build it all under cover, you can actually create a conveyor belt of really efficient shipbuilding. It becomes almost like a Formula 1 pit stop team where the teams get really, really efficient at building. That's what you're seeing at Govan. They're going to build a huge undercover assembly hall because they've got that long-term 30-year order pipeline from the Navy to build ships. So we can do the same with CalMac ferries.
Okay.
It's because they keep drip-feeding these individual designs every few years, and no one yard has the security to say, well, we'll put the investment in to get the yard properly match fit. We need to join us up, and the government are being too laissez-faire with it. They're just saying, oh, we'll give it, just leave it up to CMAL to do. They're not interested in a long-term industrial strategy. What they're interested in is buying ships.
Right.
They're not just doing it in Turkey.
Jenny Minto, I mean, this isn't an abstract thing. You live on an island, so you know the pressure that CalMac is under right now. The question is, can we ever return to those days of kind of pride and faith in shipbuilding around here?
So I live on Isla, and I used to manage the museum on Isla, and I recognise the stories and the pride because a lot of Elichs came across to this part of Scotland to work in the shipbuilding industry. So I think what the Scottish Government has done has continued to invest in the building of these 2 ships, which has ensured that there is a workforce, the number of people that have continued to be employed. Now, I'm not saying everything's perfect. I think we've heard from Paul the story behind these 2 ships, and it breaks my heart as well when I drive past and see the 2 ships sitting here. But things are moving on, and I do hope, as an islander, that we do get both the Glensannox and 802 out quickly. Now, with regards to the investment that we should be looking at for our shipbuilding, I think Paul's correct. We do need to keep renewing the CalMac vessels. And I think, again, the ideal place to be doing that is in Scotland, and having the pipeline and the skills being trained up. And I know about the number of apprenticeships that have been started up in Ferguson.
So what will be learned from this situation to make sure it doesn't happen again moving forward?
So if I could finish the point that I was about to make, but I think living on an island, we have to recognise that just now we do have a gap in the number of ships. So I think it's correct that in that time to fill that, the Scottish Government did the right thing by ordering 2 vessels from Turkey, and then have increased that order to 4. So what that gives islanders, what that gives Scotland, is the resilience of a service, because it's 4 boats that are interchangeable, so crew can move to one, and it gives a much more strengthened service, which, as an islander, and I'm sure many of you have people that have got family or friends that live on islands as well, I think that is a really important thing.
All right, let me ask, no, hang on a second. Let me ask this man in the front row. You put your hand up when I asked anybody who works in shipbuilding or has family in shipbuilding. Are you happy with the answers that you got there? Does that reassure you in any way?
From what I do, my brother worked at Ferguson's. He worked building the destroyers, and he also worked building the aircraft carriers as an electrician, him and his son. Now, he went from that to Ferguson's, and he said the management, the wrong management team were in there. There was some people who, like procurement, apparently there was some guy from procurement who used to work in a superstore, procuring for like some, if it's true or I'm not sure. But I think that, as it seems to be, you've got to have the right people in there, and to put the right people in, you've got to give them the right money. I mean, somebody who's in charge of a shipyard's got to get blowing big money. I'm sure the gentleman there will tell you. But the skills are here. I mean, this is a shipbuilding town. The skills are here, but I'd agree again with the Labour gentleman that if you've not got a proper plan to start with, that's where it's went wrong. That's where it's went wrong. And the one last thing I'd like to say, in fairness to the Scottish Government, if they didn't step in, that place would have shut. It would have shut down. There'd have been no jobs, no apprentices, no work.
OK. Lady in the front row.
Given that you're talking about 2 other yards, both Rosyth and Glasgow, being, you know, very effective and efficient, there must be a template out there that says if this can be done. Yep. I'm struggling to understand how Ferguson's has ended up the way it has and has not learned lessons from the effective places. And the other thing I've not heard out of any of this is who's been held accountable. And until you have accountability for any situation, you're never going to repair it and get it back to where it should be.
Thank you. And just, gentleman on the back there. Yeah.
The Inch Green campaign actually presented a plan to Kate Forbes just before she went on maternity leave about building the future Scottish ferry fleet. And we said we could do 20 ships in 20 years. And actually, she was very interested in it because of the cost factor. But it was catamarans. And the last thing at SEMA I wanted was catamarans. Now they've got the Pentalina now going to, they've hired. So there's definitely a plan there. It's just about the Scottish Government picking up and running.
All right. Christopher Brookmeyer, you've listened to all of this. Do you think we can get back to the days of pride and faith in shipbuilding here?
Yeah, especially having listened to Paul outlining this, that this is actually quite an inspiring vision of this, as you say, the pit stop crew, the production line, that is possible. But you're asking what can be learned. So I'm not particularly informed in this area. I mean, my knowledge of shipbuilding is so minuscule, you need an electron microscope to see it. But from what can be learned, I think is the next phase of this is obviously going to be finding out, when it comes to our public money, was how it was spent and what decisions were made throughout the procurement process. At that point, we need maximum transparency so that we do learn, so that politics doesn't get in the way of learning lessons. Because I feel like we were discussing earlier the fact that this all goes back to a plan that was signed off on before it was actually complete. And the politics of that have been corrosive in that you ask yourself, why would a government sign off on a plan that's not complete? And the answer is they wanted the fanfare, they wanted to be able to say progress was being made. And that's often the problem, is that the need for political capital gets in the way of actually getting the job done.
Your views on everything you hear tonight, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Christopher Brindle. Chris.
Small businesses are on the knees. What do the panel think can be done to boost confidence before we lose thousands more businesses?
Thank you very much indeed. Federation of Small Businesses say 1 in 4 small businesses in Scotland could go under as a result of the cost of living crisis. Poonam Gupta, you started your multi-million-pound business at the kitchen table, not far from here. What needs to happen?
I find that, government is often reactive rather than proactive when they are engaging with businesses. So in recent times, we're talking about F&B is a big sector in Scotland, and there is talks about further regulations in advertising, for example, alcohol, or the failure of the deposit return scheme, for example, and businesses are saying, bring us to the table, talk to us. You know, don't just come up with policies that you don't fully understand how they are going to operate, and that's where businesses lose confidence. When I started, I did start from zero, and I got a lot of support in terms of learning, in terms of helping me with skilling myself, in terms of incentives that the government was giving to new businesses, and that helped me start on my journey. And I believe that today, like, look at the environment over the last few years. We've had challenges after challenges. When I say we, I speak for SMEs. I'm an SME CEO myself. We had Brexit, COVID, and COVID affected, you know, certain industries so badly, and those industries are still struggling, still trying to recover and saying we are nowhere at the revenue levels we were pre-COVID. And then we are talking about energy crisis. Businesses were screaming about, please do something about energy crisis since last April. We only heard the news in autumn. And sometimes this kind of behavior by the government is too late. Engage with businesses, engage with us proactively, try to understand what we want. So when you come out with policies, they actually complement us rather than creating more problems for us or more costs for us. Another example I'd like to say perhaps is, you know, the loss of Freeport, which could have been Clydeport for us. What it could have brought to this area and to Greater Glasgow was around 30,000 jobs, £2.5 billion of investments, and over the years, 18 billion of GVA. And that's been lost, although it was a very ambitious deal. This area, it's a well-known fact, is one of the most deprived areas in the UK. Did we need Freeport? We did. And if we don't have it, so we don't lose that momentum or that excitement or the plans which were there, which the council was very supportive of, can the government think of another incentive? Can the government again work with Westminster to come up with another plan to keep the momentum going so we can bring more jobs
let's see
to
the
this
audience.
area?
Any small business owners in the audience here tonight? Gentleman on the black top. Yeah.
I'd just like to say, when all these energy contracts are being renewed with businesses, they are going absolutely crazy. I tried to sign 5 contracts at one point, and every time the companies refused to countersign it because the market was too volatile. Now, that was just before the government was helping out businesses with energy, but even that's a smokescreen, because what's happening is they're basing it on wholesale prices. Now, the wholesale price is not relative to the contract price, which can be 3 times, right, of what the retail price is. So you don't get any help because the wholesale price is a third of what companies are actually charging you, big energy companies. So, you know, you can still be paying 3 times your energy and you get no help from the government because the wholesale price is really low.
Interesting. So many the businesses in this area, small businesses, they're on their knees, says our questioner. What could be done to help them and bring them back up again? Malcolm Offord.
Well, SMEs are the lifeblood of the economy, certainly in Inverclyde and certainly in Scotland, and they're absolutely vital to our prosperity. And we can only grow public services if we grow wealth. We can only grow wealth if we grow the private sector. So it's absolutely critical that we give that support. The major issue, obviously, was the COVID issue, and obviously a lot of government money went into that.
Cost of living crisis isn't helping, though.
The cost of living, so COVID, we got through COVID, but just to be clear in terms of the finances of the UK, before COVID, the UK would borrow 50 billion a year. In COVID, we borrowed 400 in 2 years. So it quadrupled, effectively, from 20 billion to 50 to 200. And so that's left a big debt problem. The result of which is that now our interest on our debt is now 20, well, it was 20 billion, is now 100. You put that in context between 160 on health, 130 on pensions, 80 on education and 50 on defence. Our debt service in the UK is now our 3rd biggest spending department, 100. So that puts a lot of constraint on what government can do in terms of helping. So what needs to happen, the second intervention then is the energy intervention, and I get the point about the vagaries of the market. There's a time lag in that market. But we are seeing energies coming down. They'll come down a third. We have to make sure that we get those energy prices passed through, and smart businesses will find a way to do that.
Poonam says government doesn't listen enough to business.
Government listens to business. I can tell you, government listens to business all day long, and because business is the heartbeat of our prosperity. Absolute heartbeat of our prosperity. We cannot keep putting regulation up in front of business. We've got a whole raft of things coming through. We've mentioned the bottle scheme, which is going to add a huge amount of cost to small businesses. Of the 4,000 that they want to sign up, 4,000 companies, only 600 have signed up. Just can't afford it.
So it's about government being less involved with business, giving business more space to do what it does.
Government needs to back off, deregulate, and allow business to do what it does
Jenny,
best.
is that how you see it? Government needs to back off business?
Businesses are the lifeblood of our economies. I live on an island. I can see that driving through Argyll, the importance of having small businesses across the constituency, across Scotland. I think there has to be a level of regulation, which I think is important, because that gives everybody the confidence that that business is treating its employees correctly, is looking after the right health and safety issues.
But is there enough support, is the question?
So when we were talking about energy costs, I think this is where the split in powers between Westminster and Holyrood come in that energy is reserved to Westminster. So we need to have much more, I suppose, understanding as to the impact. I mean, Argyll is one of the areas where we get so much renewable energy from, and yet businesses are looking at the cost of their energy bills, as the gentleman commented. But currently, the Scottish Government can do nothing to change that. We need... unfortunately, we need Westminster to look at that. So I think regulation is appropriate where it's needed. Do I think the governments could do a bit more to help? I think everybody would say, yes, governments could do a bit more to help. And I think it has also to be in partnership with the businesses themselves to make sure it's the right
Brookmar, what can be done to boost confidence of small businesses on their knees?
Would access to the single market help? Or is this... access to a talent pool that's wider than one country as well. I mean, obviously, we've talked about COVID being a massive problem, but Brexit is going to be a massive drag on any attempt. But I say another drag must be like wage stagnation. If people have more wages and then there's more money flowing through the economy, there's greater consumer confidence because people feel they've got more money to spend. You know, it's the thrift paradox again. That if people feel that they're having to watch the pennies because they can't afford anything, then they're going to think carefully about every purchase they make.
Paul Sweeney, small businesses really on the sharp end of this cost of living crisis. You've been involved in the Morton's situation this week. How do we help them get back on their feet, business in general, and boost confidence in small businesses?
Well, Morton's is just one example of crises faced by businesses across this country where rising costs basically crushed its profit margins to the point where it ran out of cash, couldn't pay its staff, couldn't buy stock to manufacture anymore, and it ran out of cash, basically. And that's a crisis being faced by hundreds of businesses across Scotland. And, you know, Malcolm talks about the debt crisis faced by government. The only way we overcome a debt crisis in this country is with economic growth. And if we're going to suffocate businesses, then we're simply going to enter into a spiral of decline, a doom loop, which this government seems intent on because it had stagnant economic growth. It's got the worst growth record of any government in this country's history. You know, that we aren't going to get out of this through more austerity and by cutting public investment. That's not going to get us out of it. We need to do what we did after the Second World War, where we faced far greater debt pressures. We actually invested in good public service. We raised wages so people could spend more in the economy, and it lets 1,000 flowers bloom. You know, we also need to look at structural problems. Yes, absolutely. A horrendous profiteering by energy companies needs to be brought into check, and that's something Labour is committed to dealing with through windfall taxes and redistributing that and actually correcting the regulation of the market. But also we need to look at things like business rates. The system of business rates in this country is horrendous, whereas it doesn't reflect performance of businesses at all. It's about floor space. Let's actually look at how we tax businesses in a way which reflects their performance, and we actually allow more businesses to start up in Scotland because we have a real problem.
I want to get one more question, so very briefly in response, Malcolm.
Just very briefly, there's been no austerity in terms of public spending. The public spending in the United Kingdom over the last 7 years has gone up by 6% per annum. 6% per annum growth of spending. And in Scotland, it's gone up at 8%. Scottish Government spending, if you look in the JAWS report, page 39, you'll find it's gone up at 8%. That is a phenomenal. How many in the private sector would love to have growth of 8%? It's a phenomenal number, and Scotland is well funded through the UK Treasury to do that. It's a matter of priority. If you see cuts, it's priorities, and you have to ask the Scottish Government about what their priorities are.
OK, you'll have your own views on that. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our fourth question of the night, which comes from Fiona Cameron. Fiona.
Last year in Inverclyde East, the local elections were uncontested because there was a shortage of candidates. In the current climate of political mudslinging and harassment by press and social media, would you encourage your children to go into politics?
Thank you very much indeed. Jenny, did you watch the debate last night and think, oh, I'm so glad I'm in politics? Do you think other people watched it last night and thought, I want to get into politics?
So I came to politics late in life. As you said, I qualified as an accountant. I worked at the BBC and then managed the museum on Islay. So I have built a bit of a hinterland around me. And I think that, in some respects, has given me a bit of a shield to what goes on. Would I suggest somebody entered politics? Yes, I would. And the reason I would is because you can make a difference. You can change things. You can support people. You can meet people with fantastic ideas and try and bring them into the wider community. I find this all the time when I go around my constituency. I say it's Scotland's most beautiful constituency, and it's also got the most beautiful people in it. And these people come to me with great ideas that they want to look and support their communities. They worked so hard together during COVID, and we really saw the strength. And it's people. It's a belief in the people that we live beside, that we work with, that we can help, we can learn from, that I think really makes politics, I think, one of the most interesting careers you could have.
Fiona, who asked the question, would you ever have considered a career in politics?
I might have done 40 years ago, but not now.
Why not now?
I think the level of acrimony and just political backstabbing is not healthy. And I think to have, listening to Prime Minister's questions or First Minister's questions, the nonsense that goes on with the behaviour, we wouldn't have been allowed to behave like that in the school debating club. It's appalling.
Malcolm Offord, when you were at school here, did you ever think about a career? You ended up in politics. Did you ever consider a career in politics at that age?
I did, but my business career came first, and I'm now coming to it later. But we know the famous quote from Cicero: "If you want good politics, good people have to stand." So we have to have good people to stand. My observation, relatively new to politics, 18 months, is that when we're away from the TV cameras and away from the public platform, politicians agree on quite a lot of things, actually. We're all in this to make our communities better. We want to make our towns and cities better. We want prosperity. We want fairness. We all generally agree on these things. It tends to be when it becomes more of a public forum, it becomes a bit more of a bric-a-brac event. But I think generally politicians come in for the right reasons, and we need more young people to do that.
Christopher Brookman, are you worried that we're putting off good people?
No, actually, I think obviously the social media environment has to be regulated. That's as much an issue for social media as it is for politics. I think that I think Malcolm makes the point that there's an adversarial nature that becomes performative sometimes when politics comes into the public space, whereby often, sadly, programmes like Question Time, where people have found, certain pundits have found that if they kind of make a virtue of their ignorance and then express that ignorance forcibly enough, they'll earn rounds of applause from people who know even less than them. And it kind of, it artificially kind of inflates the impact of aggression But actually, I'm quite hopeful for a new generation of politics, because my son's generation, I've never known a generation that were as engaged with politics as before. They know the issues, and they're also a generation that are very, very engaged with each other's feelings and each other's welfare. And so therefore, that's why often you will get the right-wing press complaining about cancel culture, when what they really mean is young people are criticising them. And it's because they are engaged with that, and maybe the way in which they engage with politics will not be a way that we recognise. It won't be as party political in future, but they are engaged with politics. They're not put off by it. But we need to create a more cooperative and less adversarial way of doing politics.
Would you ever be tempted to take a career in politics based on what we've talked about here?
I often find that, you know, politicians, they do a good job, and, you know, they don't always get it right, but we're very quick to criticize when they get it wrong, but not acknowledge when they get it right or applaud them when they get it right. By no means politics is easy. It's not, because you're constantly answering to your constituents, or, you know, when you're a prime minister, I suppose you're responsible for the entire country. But I believe somebody's got to do it. It's a job, and somebody's got to do it. Somebody needs to somebody decides, I'm going to get into politics, hopefully with the right mindset. I want to make a difference to my society. I want to make a difference to my community. And perhaps if they're brave enough, I want to make a difference to my country. And if one goes into politics with the right intention and is just scared about the social media, the abuse, unfortunately, they are the realities of today's time.
But it risks putting people off. Paul Sweeney, would you recommend your children to follow you into politics?
Well, I came into politics quite young, unexpectedly, at the age of 28 in a snap election in 2017. And I never for a minute thought I'd actually ever be elected to Parliament or be able to do the job I'm doing. But I think I share the motivation of most people in politics. They want to do this job because they want to do things to achieve things for their communities. They don't just want to be someone. You know, I've got very specific things I'd like to step away from this job eventually in however many years and hopefully have achieved and look back with a degree of satisfaction.
Would you recommend it to the next generation of
Yes, I would, because it's something that's driven by passion. There's passionate people, good people out there who have a lot to offer our communities. And yes, we've lost maybe the art of disagreeing cheerfully in this country, and it's something we need to rediscover. But I think we can do that, and it needs people to lead it. You know, we can only do it if people step forward and do it.
You got a straight answer to a question. Everybody's happy. That's it for tonight.